Good evening and welcome to Cafe Muse. I'd like to thank you, Michael Davis, for sharing your gift of classical music with us, and Henry Crawford for sharing your gift of photography. I'm Renee Garrity and I'll be your host for this evening. Majda Gama will introduce Jessica Cuello and Ellen Cole will introduce Katherine Young. Our behind the scenes technologist that's making all of this happen is Henry Crawford, and Karen Alanier will moderate the question answers for tonight's poets. If you have questions for the poets, please place them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Your microphones are muted to keep the inevitable dog bark and doorbell from interrupting our readers. Sometimes our internet chooses its own path, so please bear with us if there's a technological glitch. If you have difficulties hearing, there is a gray box on the bottom of the screen labeled CC. If you click on it and choose Show Subtitles, closed captions will appear along the bottom. There's also a chat icon and an emoji at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to use them throughout the readings. We encourage you to buy our readers' featured books and to donate to Cafe Muse to support our literary programs. We will put the links in the chat for you and you can follow them and buy the books. So it's time to begin our reading. And I'll turn it over now to Majda Gama. Majda?
Thanks, Renee. Welcome to everybody, especially Jessica. Welcome to Cafe Muse. It's my pleasure to introduce award-winning poet Jessica Quayo tonight, reading from her collection Liar, winner of the 2020 Barrow Street Book Prize as selected by Dorian Lowe. In Liar, we learn the price of having a body. The body in the womb, the body of a young girl, a young woman, and then a young mother. Not a stage in life comes without some toll to be paid. Using inventive and lyrical language that is both constrictive and freeing, we find a world where words carry double meanings. Words invert and verb themselves. The act of spelling itself is unfamiliar. It's through this unique vernacular that we are immersed into an often animalistic world where trauma reverberates through the generations, into a lonely world of fluorescent desire, where books and libraries are holier than church. It is a world that is actually often on fire, a world that shatters and reforms, functioning as a cage of breath. I was not a bystander, we were told early on in the poem, Stomach, spelled S-T-O-M-I-C. I was not a bystander, and neither are we. It is up to us, the reader, to take these compressed, muscular poems and live through the truth of them. Jessica Quayo is the author of Liar, as selected by Dorian Lowe for the 2020 Barrow Street Book Prize. She is also the author of Hunt, Through the Woodworks, 2017, and Pricking from Tiger Bark Press. She has been awarded the 2017 CNY Book Award, the 2016 Washington Prize, the New Letters Poetry Prize, a Saltonstall Fellowship, and the New Ohio Review Poetry Prize. She is a poetry editor at Tahoma Literary Review. Please welcome Jessica.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's so beautiful. I think I would like a copy of it so I could put it on my wall. It feels really good to be here with everyone. I love when I get to engage with my poet self. And I am reading tonight from Liar. I'm going to show you the cover briefly. The art on the cover was done by one of my former high school students, and Liar just came out 2 weeks ago. So this is one of my very first readings. If the father has no bread, he's an empty pantry, the riddle, the prank call, the ding-dong ditch. He's a voice in the walls, the closet with its unwashed smells. If the father has no rent, if his teeth are missing, he's the bum next door, the phone off the hook, idle in the devil's hands. If he lives next door with a woman not the mother, he is the neighbor. If he shakes her until the bruises and the black eye, until the police in the foyer, he is the criminal. The apartment is long and narrow, a tunnel from end to end. The front door is a portal to the back, where ahead the child saw last, the last time, then never again. The back steps are a concrete plank where he will walk expelled. If the father has a first name, is not called father, if he's a lapse in judgment, if the father can't be counted, can the child? Some of the poems in this book are based on misspellings, and most of them I got from my students' papers. And this is one such poem called Hunger, Hungur. Hunger was secret, hump on the back, the something else. The body insisting that it was present. Heavy child head, teeth in rows, an assemblage of girl put together like a word. Shame was the time of day. The body spelled need with her ugly limbs, half bone, half skin, shame to eat, shame to pee, shame to enter in and exit out. Grown-ups made a body, made it like a weed and sent it to school. The bones grew, the skin stretched. The body sat in the square of desk, hunger pulled. The alphabet lined the board. The words, that, this, those, were tacked to the wall. Strange sons, the head grew toward. To loneliness. You're a room with no doors, the innermost white ash of the fire, a wool coat with X's sewn on the inside. You are a liar. We lie side by side. You shape the ceiling face, sing from the iron vent, whisper to the one-armed boy. When the child wakes in the empty house, you are waiting. They say you live in fields of snow, but you hate starkness. I breathe your cold skin. You are a gravestone face, a nursery rhyme in the body, the old man who played one, who played knick-knack on my thumb. When the nurse's tender fingers touch your neck, you cry. Your nerves are pale strikes of lightning across the silent lake. We touch with just eyes. You read to rid yourself of invisibility, and at night become a lone toll booth worker, hunched with fluorescent desire. Limbo. I draw an eye on my notebook, a swirl of ink. I'm not sure whose, but it sees me when my brother can't. He lives with us, but died somewhere back in childhood. He won't say how. His limbs move well enough to walk to school and back. I've seen his vacant eye, seen him in the hallway in his same sweatshirt. He won't pronounce my name. He skips the I. He shuts his door. We once were close, walked hand in hand, pre-language. We shared a bed. My notebook I is more alive than he. Grain of paper, welt of ink. It sees more than a dead boy. And because he does alive things, like sleep and eat, I can't mourn. My babysitter, Karen B., who was sent to Willard Asylum. There are only 2 photos of me as a child. She took them. She had no child. She had cool cigarettes and a job at the drugstore. She gave me the Crayola box with the built-in sharpener. 400 suitcases were stored in the attic of Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane. She joined her twin brother there. She wore her black hair down. A child could admire it. She bought me an Easter basket, a stuffed rabbit whose fur rubbed off. She walked everywhere. She painted circles of blush on her cheeks. Loony, people said so. I mean grown-ups who saw signs, who passed her on our street before she started to call and say, remember. On the phone she said, remember. Remember the date we killed her brother, forgetting he'd been committed. I took her hand and tagged along like an animal. She was perfect to a child. In 1995, when the asylum closed, an artist took photos of the 400 suitcases. The photos were put online, the contents laid out respectfully. In the open suitcases, belts, pocket knives, Lone Ranger cards, keys, ribbons, shoe polish, mirrors, pills, a fountain pen, bottle of glycerin, a zither, kit of needles, bread ration card, the Gospel of John, a letter. Each suitcase had a name. Lena C., Lillian L., Mary T., Gloria P., Cassie M., Francis T., Marion R., Katherine S., Dimitri Z., Ruby C., Anthony C., FJL, Biology, Alice T., Carrie L., Karen B., remember. And that art exhibit is actually online. The suitcases that were taken from Willard Asylum, that's near where I am now in central New York, that was shut down. I'm not talking much between poems because I'm reading from the screen. I can't see anyone's face, so it just feels weird to engage with talking. So you're just going to get poems. I nod when the school's visiting doctor asks if I eat 3 meals a day. In my family, you recreate invisible and freeze like a rabbit. You do not cry. God can read your mind. In my family, you lie in the snow and dream how your birth happened. The rough edge of the tabletop, the knuckles of the artist father who paints all night in a disease, then leaves and leaves. No one confesses anything. The black and blue mother scrapes herself together, and into the world comes a baby with her mouth open. In my family, you tame your needs. You bite, but don't chew the winter leaves. You drink milk white snow from your mittens. This is a little pantoum. Laundromat with single mother. We put our dirty clothes in trash bags and took a cab to the laundromat, where I gave her the cold shoulder. The windows were floor to ceiling glass. We took a cab to the laundromat where outsiders could see my cold mother through the floor to ceiling glass, getting us clean and see how we got mothered. Twice she birthed herself in us. She got us clean, a young mother who folded each piece of cloth. Twice she gave birth. Her clothes and ours touched her hands. She folded each piece. I buried my face in the warm clothes that touched her hands. I was the youngest child. I buried my face in the clothes. I was critic and girl, the youngest child. She stacked the piles in trash bags, ordered her critic and girl to keep an eye out for the cab. She carried out the trash bags when it was time to go, and we watched for the cab. I was a silent, cold shoulder. The cab honked at us to hurry, and she grabbed my cold shoulder in silence like it was her own limb. That shirt makes you a whore because it's black. That's the title. I paid for the whore shirt with my own money, bought it at the mall. It was buttoned down and satin to the touch. Who was this whore that had never kissed anyone, not even her mother? Who would not menstruate until she was old enough to leave home, until she had tasted fat, the pleasure of its depth? Whoreness must have started at the sleepovers when we played hooker. We stripped for each other. No, whoreness started younger, at 3, at 2, at birth, in the womb, whoring with balled fists and floating in the whore sea. When the 11-year-olds played streetwalker, I was the best. What did the best mean? It meant no smile. It was shame in girl form, which was shame's first form. It meant relinquish the body. It meant do not eat in front of others, do not pee in public bathrooms, not even school. It was the body in plain sight, but hidden, the girl's small cocked hip in the room of girls. And I'm just going to do 2 more. This one is called Feeding Ritual. Write the instructions in a list. Rise, get dressed, turn his head, latch his lips. Trapped inside the breast is the holy lost, the untaught lesson. The milk won't stream. Milk is dammed against his mouth. I listen for a whisper, for the instinct. I listen, but no one. Once I saw a Roman Christ with beard and breasts. She was lifting up a stained glass hand, but I was late. It was before I was a girl mother, before I was swollen and could not feed. Stuck in glass, always on the verge of teaching. Can you hear the hand, the little sucking? Can you hear the breast, her sad blue rivulets? What you can't hear, you must list. The Bird Girl. When a world was in me, I wept for the milk, burning my breast red, red as the wagon in the yard, and plastic things are ugly when they're old. I took a pill for that, for my child's mouth smaller than mine. There were seeds knotted, there were walls of me that slid away, there was the Red Sea. Before I knit you in the womb, I knew you. And after, I was never known. And when the world left me, I wept like Joseph, father of no baby, whose wife chose God. God the adulterer, God loved only her. Her bird gasp and bird gallows, tiny annunciation, nest of the dead. And that was my last poem. So thank you so much for listening, everybody.
Thank you, Jessica. That was a beautiful reading. I love your poems. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ellen Cole, one of the Cafe Muse co-hosts. And tonight, I'm delighted to introduce you to my good friend, Katherine Young. I met Katherine in the early 2000s when I read in a poetry reading she organized with Cliff Bernier in Arlington around the theme of witness. And since then, I've learned that she is a poet whose poems are brave and tender, vulnerable and assertive, and challenge the norms of how we believe the world to be. Katherine is a highly skilled translator of Russian language poets, But this evening, she's going to be reading from her own impressive body of work. Her new book of poems, Women Drinking Absinthe, was published in 2021 by Allen Squire Publishing. Her poetry collection, Day of the Border Guards, was a finalist for the 2014 Miller Williams Arkansas Poetry Prize. Katherine is the editor of the newly released anthology, Written in Arlington, and curates Spoken in Arlington, a digital archive of spoken word and performance poetry by artists connected to Arlington. Her poems have been published in Prairie Schooner, the Iowa Review, Subtropics, and many other journals and magazines. Her translations of Russian language poetry and prose include Farewell, Alice by Azerbaijani, Political Prisoner Akram Elishi, and Look at Him by Anna Starobinets, as well as two collections of poems by Inna Kabish. I asked Katherine if she wanted me to tell you anything about her poetic influences, and I love the answer she gave me, so I'm going to quote her. I first got serious about my own writing while living and working in Moscow, Russia, and I count Russian poets as one of my most important teachers. Not too many American-born poets can say that they were more deeply influenced by Pushkin than Walt Whitman, but I can. If Russian poetry puts you in mind of the deep complexities and suffering of the human heart, then Katherine's poems certainly fit the bill. Women Drinking Absinthe takes us into the demi-monde of love, peopled by a speaker who wishes to be mesmerized by love, but suffers its blows again and again. In the first sequence of poems, The Bear, she is wooed by an ursine lover with skin that smells of must, flesh that tastes of honey, but who drags her through town at the end of an invisible chain. The women in her poems range from a suburban housewife plotting an affair to a mermaid, a succuba, a golden fish, a barmaid in a painting by Monet, and a woman drinking absinthe with her lover in Toulouse-Lautrec's Moulin Rouge. In the words of reviewer Karen Kavasik, Women Drinking Absinthe jolts like a sugar cube dipped in wormwood. Young chronicles the body's inexplicable hungers with Euclidean geometry, Manet's ambivalent barmaid, the bloody tale of Bluebeard, the colonizing love triangle of Madame Butterfly. From the first heady musical poem, You Too Will Succumb to Young's Viridescent Dreams. So now I'm going to turn the mic over to Katherine Young and her Viridescent Dreams.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I'm like Jessica. I think I want that introduction framed on my wall. Thank you so much. It is always a joy to read at Cafe Muse, where I was once a host long ago. And it's especially nice to read with Jessica. I'm still hearing in my ears like a lone toll booth worker hunched with fluorescent desire and shame in girl form, and those suitcases from the Willard Asylum. Thank you for sharing your wonderful work. And I am looking forward to getting my hands on a copy of Liar. I also want to say thank you to everybody who's tuning in tonight. We have all been, most of us, through now many months of Zoom readings, and I don't take your presence here for granted, because I know what it takes to listen to poetry intensely for many minutes. So thank you for joining us. So Woman Drinking Absinthe, as you might guess from the title, is a book about transgressions. And here you can see Toulouse-Lautrec's painting on the cover. It's about the terrible things that people do to themselves and to other people, often in the name of love. And I wanted to see if I could breathe some new life into age-old tropes of fairy tale, myth, and opera.
And I also included a number of poems with themes of science and math. I think I'm a frustrated science geek. And so I'm going to start tonight with a poem on planetary geology and interplanetary traveling. The poem is called Nakhla. Nakhla is a thing. It's a particular calcium-rich igneous rock, and it was formed on Mars 1.3 billion years ago. And it's named for Nakhla, Egypt, where it made a rather dramatic appearance in 1911. And now that the Air and Space Museum is open again here in DC, you can go there and you can actually touch a piece of this 1.3 billion year old Martian rock. Nakhla. Perhaps it begins in Egypt, heralded by thunderbolts. Things that fall from the sky always have meaning. Tang of scorched flesh, fur, fear. A farmer points to the spot where his dog was just standing, howling perhaps at unkind fate, which leaves no trace of him, not even a bone to bury him by. Perhaps it begins millions of years ago, time of soft-bodied creatures, jellyfish, worms, time when a planet's passions cool, harden to stone, time when shells accrete, when trilobites scissor free from pouches, when a cousin of the Nautilus first fuses tentacles to spadix, passes sperm to the female during lazy day-long couplings in a gentle sea. Perhaps it begins on Mars as magma cools itself to crystal. When water splits that crystal, veins the cracks with carbonate. Perhaps it begins when an unknown force slams into Mars, blasting that rock out into space. 10 million years go by. Oceans fall, mountains rise, and Lucy Australopithecus chooses her mate. Now we come to Egypt. A farmer whistles for his dog. At this moment, a 22-pound Martian rock shrieks overhead, shatters in fire above the Nile. Proof, if any's needed, that what's essential to both blood and bone travels the planets. Calcium, iron, magnesium, silver, elements that stiffen shell and skeleton, that bind and carry oxygen, that transmit sense from nerve to straining nerve, pulse and gasp, ebb and flow, rhythm of two human hearts. Perhaps it begins this instant as I lay my body over yours, bone rocking bone, tooth skimming skin, night sky of summer exploding above us, silver white, malleable, stars figure your face. My next poem is in dialogue with the marvelous Russian poet Marina Tsvetaeva, who was famous, about as famous for her love affairs and for burning things to the ground as she was for her poetry. Today, I'm writing love songs. Today, I'm writing love songs, Marina, as if you yourself had written none, as if no other woman ever felt or smelled or tasted love's ripe flesh, never stripped love's husk to find succor within until I, arriving with my hand outstretched, plucked at it from idle curiosity. I promise, Marina, I'll savor this love whole, run my lips along its rim, swallow juices, rind, pips, drink in each drop as if it's the last. Passion slips from its skin, dissolves sweet, hot, sour, bitter, salty on my tongue, recalling foods fashioned by the ancients who stirred seeds of love in their cooking pots. They say I look young again, Marina, my skin's furrows softened by gentle rain. But you and I, we descend from monsoon. Our sort of love engorges the river, corduroys the fields, drowns the seedlings asleep in cradling earth, heat, water, ooze, fruit rotting in mud, no havens safe from us. Calculus. And they're picking at sushi and talking like people who don't know each other well, but mean to, and aren't so sure of the rules anymore. Because the old rules covered things like a girl not talking dirty and backseat kissing and all the places she shouldn't let him put his hands. But this new talk needs new rules. Now he's quoting his therapist and she's saying he should leave his wife now. She's saying staying's worse. And both of them are draining glasses, mounding napkins, flicking chopsticks so as not to accidentally glimpse the slits that can ghost across wrists, because here in this talk, the husbands are shouting, they're slapping not so secret lovers, while at home the wives are screaming and the children have been stayed together for, and their savage, selfish eyes let no one forget it, while their fathers are screaming as their mothers take lovers whom they're kissing in cars, hands bruising in motion as breath stutters, sobs, approaches infinity. If there is a hell, it resembles this street in shadow, this street and this street lamp, where you and I cling so tightly, our flesh bruises for weeks and our mouths ache with the work of longing. It blinks cold, disapproving, like stars glimpsed from hard ground as muscle grinds into grit. It feels like your fingers for tears on my cheek. It tastes of tea brewed by your wife, shakes like her hand as she pours a cup for me. It kisses like my husband scenting you on my lips, hunches his shoulders as if he might care. It cries like my son at my step on the stair as he finds he stayed awake after all. Leaving home. Leaving home, my husband's house, I lose myself, baffled by streets bearing names I no longer know, their curves and contours couched in shadow, each Eden, El Dorado, Elysium, a sign signaling simply exit. Slipping beneath the city's skin, I discover bluegrass, blues, jazz bars, burr of scotch, whiskey with soda. I meet a man, many men, feel fingers cleanse my face, smell the way flesh melts into midnight in temporary rooms. Recently, I dreamed of home, my husband's back partitioning the bed, unbreached, unbreachable. Here, when it rains, the skylight weeps, the sink gnaws its own enamel. Near the window, an amaryllis arrays itself anxiously. So much need, my husband once said in disbelief. So much needless grief. Like Leaving Home, a number of the poems in the book explore nightlife, bars, and places where the lighting is generally pretty dim. And this next poem is one of those. It's based on a fairy tale about an enchanted fish that grants wishes in exchange for its life. The golden fish. Some say I'm a fish, some a mermaid. The women say I'm something worse. What's important? I enthrall the fishermen, arrest their knives at the point of entry. Chinese, English, Russian, all the common tongues. It isn't hard to learn the words to ask these men, what's your desire? Each thinks I speak to him alone. Each says the same thing. peace at home. The wife's forgotten how much he loves her. What she wants is stuff. Funny, these men just want to fish. Once I give him what he wants, the clever wife gets what she wants. Granite counters, induction burners. She's Lady Tsarina, Queen of Hearts. Does she ever deign to thank me? Ever imagine her life with fins? After a while, a squall blows up. He's sorry, the man tells me. His wife's gone crazy. She wants to be God. Could I please, just one last time? Some things don't even require enchantment. Go home now, I sigh. I always sigh. She's waiting by the door once more. He's gone, just like that. They never come back. The next poem is the one that Ellen mentioned, and it comes from the painting Bar at the Folie Berger by Eduard Magne. We know that the actual woman who worked in the bar at the theater walked across the street to pose for the painting in Manet's studio. And there's a note that I should probably share with you that some art historians think that Manet strategically used oranges in his painting to indicate loose women. Bar at the Folie Berger. It starts with the scent of lavender as she buttons clean pantaloons, laces up stays, smooths her bodice and shakes out the frills, ties the black ribbon about her neck. Her costume smells as they all do, mingled sweat and makeup, the fabric itself splashed perhaps with the licorice twist of absinthe. Then come powder and rouge, the small earrings, a pink and white corsage already starting to droop. Her props are placed on view, beer bottles, champagne, a vase containing 2 pale roses, cut glass bowl of oranges that may or may not indicate a certain kind of availability. Leaning against the marble bar, she doesn't look at you. Why should she look at you? Can you give her what she needs or even cab fare home? Posing perhaps, or perhaps beyond posing, her face bleak, artificially rosy amid the moon-pale globes and crystals shimmering in the ersatz heaven of the cabaret. Perhaps a man inspects her in the glass. Perhaps he's looking past. Neither of them seems to see the woman on the trapeze, feet squeezed into ankle boots of lizard green. Later, she observes his red gold lashes, watches his still young face slacken in sleep, breathes in his scent of cigars, cheap brandy, scent that clings to her fingers like orange oil as she works her nails beneath the skin, methodically stripping the pith to find whatever's left of the fruit's sweet flesh. Now, another fairy tale poem. This one's about Bluebeard. Of course, you remember Bluebeard is the ogre who kept the corpses of his murdered wives behind a locked door and then gave the enchanted key to that door to his next intended victim. Bluebeard. His beard was blue, but not so very blue. So when he handed me his keys and warned me not to try the littlest one, I fingered the scrolls that curled along its bow, its tiny nape and teeth, and hung it from a silk ribbon above my heart. I tidied the rooms while he was gone, oiling the other locks, their keys. So what if I tripped over objects in the gloom, sent them spinning toward dim corners? Of course they weren't bones. As for the iron sweet scent of blood in the air, it must have been my own. Besides, a woman needn't fear blood or bones, touchstones she's learned to reckon by. How else could she simmer stock from her body's blossom, coax fresh new growth from the very marrow of life? At last, he returned, roaring through the door, tearing cloth and wire to free the key dangling between my breasts, sniff it suspiciously, oddly arousing his pouting, disappointed mouth. Now, of course, we all think we're too clever to be deceived by ogres and magical keys and ghosts who roam among us. This next poem is called Soul Food. That first time when you hit me, I marveled at the crack your hand made as it struck flat against my face. I should have known right then we were headed straight for this soul food joint where I'm picking at turnip greens, sweet potato pie, as you plead with me to take my inconvenient heart and just go away. You say it's all my fault. I ask too much, love too deep. Don't make me do it again, you say. I know you mean it, like you mean this next thing. When we've split the last of the cornbread, made our exit past the catfish gazing lugubrious in his tank, when we're standing in the parking lot, your arms around me, your hand, same hand, traces the bone of my cheek, softly, longingly, as if I'd never been there, as if you'd never leave. I'm going to read two more poems, and the next one is a found poem. It's the only found poem in the book, and it comes from the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, which was published around 1690. So it's a 300-year-old recipe for healing, a recipe to cure mad dogs or men or beasts bitten by mad dogs. Agrimony roots, primrose roots, dragon roots, single peony roots, the leaves of box of each a handful, the star of the earth 2 handfuls, the black of crab's claws prepared, Venice treacle of each 1 ounce. All these to be beaten and bruised together and boiled in a gallon of milk till the half be boiled away, then put into a bottle unstrained and given 3 or 4 spoonfuls at a time to the dog or beast or man, 3 mornings together before new and full moon. And my final poem tonight is also a poem of healing and reflection. It's called Fig. I sometimes call it my Wikipedia poem because there's a lot about figs in this poem. And the thing you need to know about figs, aside from the fact that they're ubiquitous in history, myth, and literature, from the Bacchae to the Buddha to the Bible, all of which find a way into this poem. The thing you need to know about figs is that they flower on the inside of the fruit. So that when you eat a fig, you are also eating the flower on its inside, and you're also eating a few other things too. The poem starts with an epigraph from the Bengali. The word for fig in Bengali is dumor, and the saying that comes from Bengali translates as, "You've become invisible like the dumor, or fig, flower." And the poem comes in 5 short parts. Fig. 1. I've become the invisible flower, inflorescence of fig in bloom, embroidering my inner walls. Fleshy peduncles descend from my rib cage. Wasps colonize my pelvis, seeking the osteol's warm-mouthed murmur, sex till death. The male fig wasp develops, mates, and dies inside the fruit of his birth. How many men will die in me? 2. How many men will eat my fruit, meditate for years beneath my banyan bones? a parable of the fig tree. When the branch is tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. Rejoice in me, each under your own vine and fig tree, fruit of paradise ripening beneath the leaves that multiply, hiding our sins. 3. When I grew into my beauty, I became a canophoros and wore a necklace of dried figs. A woman learns to initiate herself, leads processions to the altar atop the Acropolis, bears the canaun readied for sacrifice. Old men tell her, dwell within the temple of our beliefs, not the wilderness that lies beyond. 4. What if wilderness lies within? I sacrificed to Dionysus, infected body and mind by him who's also God of figs. I slew the mountain lion, my son, you. Cursing the fig that yields no fruit, Jesus said, let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. His fig was just a metaphor. Every mother mourns with me. 5. I've become the Dumor flower, favorite of monkeys, bats, refuge of the wingless male. When the fig wasp dies, the fruit absorbs his body. His winged mate carries pollen, fig to fig. Women's work. Each one ripe contains 1,500 seeds. Whoso keepeth the fig tree shall eat the fruit thereof. What a pleasure it has been to be here tonight. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jessica. I want to say a word about Cafe Muse, because Cafe Muse is run by volunteers, from the people who schedule the readings, to the hosts, to those who work on tech, to those who put out the publicity. And so I want to say to everyone at Cafe Muse, poetry exists in public spaces in this country because of people like you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody who's here tonight. Thanks.
And thank you, Katherine. That was lovely. A great reading, and we still have time to have a few questions and answers. Karen, are you?
Yes, I was
There
thinking
you are.
about something.
Yes, I didn't see you on camera, so welcome, Karen.
Very good. I was wondering if you both could address this question. Could you describe your process for moving into a poem that deals with suffering? Does it begin with a phrase? Does it begin with a sudden mood? Does it begin with a story? How do you get into these stories which require so much emotional output? I mean, you have both touched so many nerves, at least in my body. There have been, the poignancies, the power of these poems. So, Jessica, would you like to go first?
Sure. It's a really good question. And it depends a lot on the poems, but I can speak to this particular book, Liar. These poems in particular sort of came out of, I mentioned that they had these misspellings threaded through many of the poems, which are words that it's a book from a child's perspective. So it's encountering language in the strangeness of language in a strange way, through the way you believe it to sound, not how it is. And I think a lot of these particular poems came out of a sense of muteness and lack of speech, which I know sounds contradictory for poetry, because they were poems that were sort of pressurized inside me for a long time. Like I have other books that came out first, but I feel like these poems were sort of like these dense little creatures. And they existed, when I say muteness, I think they existed in this sort of imprint of image and memory without language. And so the language came from behind the image, which sounds so wrong for poetry because you think music and sound and those things are so important to me. But this particular book, I feel like it came from a kind of silence. I don't know if that even makes sense. That just came out. Don't know where that answer came from, but.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense because, the struggle to make that come out. I mean, I could experience that in these poems. And I think that you did a mighty good job in bringing them to light. Katherine, how about you? What do you think?
I don't think there was anything particularly different about the process, with one exception, which I'll get to, with the process for these poems than any others that I work on. They tend to start for me, not even necessarily with a word, but maybe even a sound or a phrase. I tend to compose while I walk. That's where things start for me. And so a rhythm, a few words, something like that. It varies from poem to poem, but in general, it's not something articulate. It's just the sound itself, the sound, whatever the sound is, and that forms itself into the poem. But I will tell you the story of the one poem from which that's not true, which is Bar at the Folie Berger, the poem about the Manet painting, because that one was a strange event. I was commissioned, I think, Karen, you were part of this residency by the Washington Shakespeare Theater to go to a play, sit in the lobby while the play was being done during the breaks, and you have a little sign that said poet, and people would come up to you and talk to you about being a poet. But your job was not only to sit there during the breaks, but to write a poem overnight and get it out the next morning by something like 7:30 in the morning. And so Bar at the Folie Berger, I don't know what, there was something about the gold leaf on the molding in the theater lobby that just sparked this painting for me, or reminded me of the painting. And so I sat up for a large part of that night, wrote the poem overnight, and I think I might have changed one word after that, which does not happen for me. I'm one of these people who will edit a poem for 10 years, but this poem just kind of magically came into being, and that was quite unusual for me.
But even so, your process does speak to the rhythm, because I could hear that so well in your presentation, that the pacing and the musicality of your words. And so in order to produce an emotional load, it has to come from some, source that is not exactly spoken. It's just like what Jessica was saying. So I think you both answered the question in a very, very interesting ways.
I will just say also that I'm, a little bit older, and I came to things like spoken word and performance a little bit later in life. And I've spent a lot of time the last 10 or 15 years just kind of listening to what younger people are doing with performance and spoken word. And that's, I'm not that kind of poet, but I try really, really hard to kind of bring that energy to what I'm writing on the page.
I see Renee shaking her head. What do you have to say about that, Renee? Because I know that you have some experience in that regard.
Well, you absolutely did bring that emotion and excitement and everything that comes with spoken word, the energy that you were talking about. You nailed it. It was great.
I'm going to, by the way, Ellen, thank you very much for your introduction, and thank you, Majda, for your introduction. We had some really spectacular introductions tonight, as well as spectacular poetry. And I don't think there's any more questions in the box, and I think that I would prefer to step back at this point and let Renee close.
Okay. Well, we did have two fabulous poets, and there was there was a power in both of you guys. I want to thank you, Jessica Cuello and Katherine Young, for your just fabulous readings. And we want to encourage our listeners to purchase your books. The link should be in the chat, and also a link to donate to Cafe Muse to support the literary program. I'd also like to thank my co-hosts, Ellen Cole, Majda Gama, Henry Crawford, Leah Johnson, who, by the way, I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, but just became a grandmother today. Congratulations, Leah, and your family. I'd like to thank Susan Oakey, and of course, our Cafe Muse founder, Karen Alanier. You can find us throughout the internet on YouTube and Twitter, Facebook, and online. You can check out what we're up to and our next reading. And speaking of that, be sure to join us for our Poets versus the Pandemic, which is next Wednesday, Wednesday, the November 17th at 7 p.m. And it'll be featuring Alan King reading from his new book, Cricket Smiling Light. There'll be a link in the chat for the PVP, and we'll also send you a note or a Zoom link a few days before. We would love you to invite your friends and family, but please don't post this on social media. Sometimes the Zoom link invites Zoom bombers, a new dictionary term, I believe. Our next Cafe Muse is Monday, December 6th, 2021, with Danica Kelly and Jay Rogoff. We'll also send you a reminder with a Zoom link a few days before the reading. On behalf of all of us at Cafe Muse, we want to thank all of you for joining us. Without you, we wouldn't be here. So be well, stay safe, and good night.